If you've taken a look at images of muscular lads over the last 25 years, odds are you've seen one of the photographs taken by Randall Strossen, the founder of IronMind, Milo Magazine, Captain Crusher, Captains of Crush, Grips. He basically pioneered the athletic strength athlete photo, where if we take a look at a lot of the legends we've spoken about previously on Iron Culture, so guys like John Grimmick, Tommy Kono, there are good photos of them lifting, but the art of encapsulating what it means to be a strength athlete, the power, the majesty, as we spoke about, really started with Randall. And he wasn't just a photographer. He was an entrepreneur. He had a full-time job working in marketing at a bank, but he decided to launch IronMind because he was passionate about it. And these days, when we see, the likes of ATG, and apparently Randall said that the founder of ATG, All Things Gym, gave him immense credit for inspiring him to get into that path. Hook Rips, and now we see a lot of powerlifters, 9for9 Media. It all kind of started with Randall and some of those immortal images that we see of Pyros, of these lifters started with him. And I think it's so important to respect, and with Iron Culture, we're about history, science, culture, to chronicle the culture and portray it in a way that an outsider, a picture being worth 1,000 words, you could try and describe what weightlifting is like, but if you show that image, Pyros at the bottom of a snatch, multiple images like that, it conveys so much more.
Yeah, and what's the saying? Art reflects life, and then life reflects art. Mm-hmm. Because Randall Strossen started IronMind and Milo Magazine 31 years ago, and back in 1988, when I was in grade school. No. I mean, I was not born yet because I'm so young and
23 and just getting a PhD.
Yeah,
Come on,
just barely getting my life going because I'm so fresh and hot and young. No, but seriously, before the internet was really a thing, before there were forums, even before the social media boom, where you could have this culture that emerged from our collective sharing of our own. He talked about being a self-publisher and how now we share our own athletic identity, we share our own physical culture journey, and then something emerges from that. You get the feel of the 2019 lifting community or whatever. Before that, it was people buying Milo magazine and people in the lifting magazines and all that, and the iconic pictures that probably were taken by Randall of either World's Strongest Man or at the Olympics, which he attended multiple of, recording some of the best lifters in the world. And his ability to catch that, the grittiness, the iron, the commitment, the hard work, and the ethos of what it is to be a strength athlete, it connected people in that shared experience and then allowed them to feel a part of a culture. And that's a contribution that can't be understated.
Yeah, I think for anyone that's a true iron enthusiast that wants to know where we've come from, to know where we're going, you will enjoy this episode with Randall Strossen of IronMind, Milo Magazine, and also Captains of Crush Grippers.
Yeah, and with a PhD from Stanford in psychology.
Right, in psychology, yeah. So that's it. We get actually in a little bit of psychology of the best lifters too. So I think everyone's going to enjoy this episode.
Yeah, there's a lot of ground to touch, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. All right, so I am ecstatic to have on Iron Culture today Randall Strossen, PhD, who has joined us. He's driven down from Nevada City, which is, we really appreciate that. Randall Strossen, for those who don't know, started IronMind back in '88, which you're probably familiar with Milo. You might be familiar with the Captains of Crush. You might be familiar with the fact that he covered over 24 years of weightlifting as a photographer. Right. Mm-hmm. You might be familiar with his Iron Man column. You might be familiar with his book on squats. Mm-hmm. He's done a lot, and we're going to get into the history. We're going to get into his history because he started lifting almost 60 years ago, 55, 54, somewhere in there. And he's seen a lot, and I think he has a lot to share. So first off, I just want to thank you for coming by.
My pleasure to be here. Yeah,
Thank you.
What a robust voice. Mm-hmm. I just want to say that actually the first time I saw the IronMind Milo posters was in my buddy's gym, Allen. And I thought to myself, these are, because for modern folks, you might see on social media various maybe hook rip or whatnot, some videos, some photos and so forth. But when I was coming up and I was lifting, I wasn't aware that there even was a magazine like IronMind or like Milo or some of those shots. And to see them, all those classic photos of all those weightlifters, which is funny because when people, and you probably have an issue with this, where they either don't give credit to the origin of where it comes from. There's some iconic shots. Were you the photographer that took?
Yes.
Okay, because that's what. Because you said that when you said in passing when you're at World's Strongest Man, Randall, and you were the photographer. I'm like,
Right.
you also took the photos too.
Yeah.
You got your psychology degree from Stanford. You're taking photos as a professional photographer
Yeah.
here. You're working as a what was it? Was it vice president of marketing at a
Marketing research. Check it
there?
for you.
There you go. Oh,
PV, yeah.
I do a little research.
Hey, I'll date myself. I did the original versatile ATM marketing research. Pilot was done in Silicon Valley, 1979,
Right.
and the smart money said people would never use ATMs. You guys probably don't even know what a check is, but then people got cash by cashing a check at Safeway, the local grocery store.
Wow.
But that's how much the world's changed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so-
I had maybe half a decade of checks as a 36-year-old. Omar, did you ever use checks?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for rent and all those things like to rent, you gotta leave checks. But I was going to say is so many different things I didn't even know, and I think there's a Sacramento pride or not. Only local area
NorCal.
pride.
NorCal.
NorCal, sorry, would be more appropriate. Where I've seen the IronMind Milo posters in gyms, but so many iconic photographs that people, when if they want to reference strength athletes
Right.
from the last 30 years, actually originate with the photos that you specifically took, which I think is
you.
really cool.
Thank you. Yeah. Photography was kind of something I drifted into. I didn't really want to take pictures. I was doing some journalism at that time. I had an internship, AAAS, American Association for the Advancement of Science internship when I was in graduate school. Worked for a major newspaper over summer, and one of the reporters said, "Look, you have to learn to take some pictures." And I thought, this is really so confusing. Everything's backwards, Things are reciprocals. I didn't know an f-stop from a bus stop. But one thing led to another. And then, oddly, it's kind of the way things go sometimes. The pictures open up a lot of doors. And I won't mention his name, but a big-name guy in the strength world kind of gave a great, cold shoulder to another big-name strength guy that we knew. And I said, gee, I don't know why he did that. I mean, he's very friendly to me. And my wife goes, that's because you're walking around with a $5,000 camera around your neck and you want this picture taken.
Yeah, do it.
So that thing always, it opened doors. But yeah, I like to think that we took some iconic photos. I knew that we had, when I would see imitations of my photos, people trying to replicate it, or they had maybe taken something somewhat similar at the time, but hadn't recognized that it was really a defining moment, and then they'd come out with it after the IronMind thing. But it's always fun. Yeah. And when you had that moment when you said, you know what, I think I just got a good photo, it was very rewarding.
And I just want to take a pause because my father did a little bit of photography and he did have a good eye. We are of the social media in quotations generation that we've had our phones for at least the last 6 years that are capable of taking pretty good photographs. And we actually, our jobs, we derive our income from social media and taking photos of ourselves. We suck. I probably, Randall, guess how many photos I have on my phone?
I have no idea.
I looked the other day because I'm almost full, 17,000.
Really?
You know how many are good shots?
Yeah.
0.
Oh, yeah.
So what I'm trying to say is what I respect too is that you're right in terms of the photos that IronMind took in order to best express the majesty, I'd say, or the power or the display of the sport you were taking. You started that where if you even look probably, or you're hugely influential, because if you look before, there are certain lifters that we look back in the day, I'm naming those examples like John Grimmick.
Right.
You have some cool shots of them. Like they are good shots, but the photography level relative to the athlete wasn't on par. And it really was only probably, from what I've seen now, taking a look at some of those photos and realizing what's funny is a lot of the ones floating around the internet, they just remove the Milo or the IronMind, watermark, and they just post them. Basically started with you. So how important that is, because a picture really, what was it? Time magazine where there was a girl in Afghanistan, I think it was Steve Murray, the photographer, with green eyes.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
Kabul, and they captured her face.
Yeah.
And that photo is worth more than 1,000 words.
Yeah.
It can describe so much, right? So I think in terms of conveying strength sports to the masses, I can't understate how important that is, especially because we have a little bit of experience taking photos. Not good.
Things got easier for photographers in the digital age. Well, like for a major contest like, say, weightlifting at the Olympics or the World Championships, I would go with 50 rolls of film, which is quite a bit, take all these shots, and you come back, develop the film, look at the prints, like, oh, if I had only done this. Oh, if I had only done that. And then with digital, and I waited for the second generation of Nikon professional digital cameras to make the transition, partly because I was always traditionalist, always shot black and white film. But anyway, then I came back and I said to my wife, I said, you know what? You have no excuse with digital because you get the feedback immediately. And you can't say, oh, if I'd only done this, if I'd only done that, because you had a chance to do this or that on the next attempt.
Yeah.
So things got easier in the digital world. And I mean, this thing bokeh, which is like not having much depth of field. Well, you had to know something about photography, have the right equipment to do that traditionally. But yeah, with all the effects, post-production tools that you've got and things like Photoshop, it's amazing. And so many photos now I think are over Photoshopped. They really look not very good.
Yeah,
man,
It's like eye candy and get sick of it really quickly. But
yeah, we have no excuse, and like
what he's trying to highlight is we are just absolute failures. Like, oh no, it's easier now.
there's no artistry anymore,
Oh.
and especially with bodybuilding, where it's not like you're trying to catch them at the bottom of a snatch,
Right.
And you're trying to he missed it. Okay, well that's all right. We got two more. No, that guy bombed
It's done.
out.
It's done. Yeah, you get one shot at the photo basically for that attempt, right? Where I'm thinking of a few where guys at the bottom of the squat or bottom of catching a snatch or so forth. It's like either you got the shot basically or you don't.
Right.
Yeah, like we were taking some pictures at Alan Thrall's gym, and we were like trying to get the picture right, and it took so long that the sun had moved to a place where there was going to be no good outside pictures because it was straight down. We were shadowing ourselves, and then we found an area inside. Oh, we have some good shots here, and we did 15 versions of the same one to get something average. Oh, you just change the lighting here, add some structure or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, we're really bad at what we do.
See, that's the advantage of something like World's Strongest Man, which is a TV show as opposed to a live event. They'll do the event over if the sun's not right or if a camera wasn't set up.
They'll
Yeah,
do.
people don't realize that. Yeah, or they'll wait for a certain period of time.
They'll redo. The athletes will redo.
They'll redo.
No
something
way.
Restart. Yeah, and wait for the sun. So on and so forth. Increase wait times. All that. Yeah, because it's made for TV, and so they get the second chance. Sports Palace. The Sports Palace is a legendary gym in the Mission District. When the Mission District was really the Mission District in San Francisco. 19th and Valencia. The back room was weightlifting. Niku Vlad, an Olympic medalist, was there. And I don't know, maybe I'll have to make up a number, snatched 190 kilos, and a lady was there taking pictures, and she missed the shot. She said, then they'd strip the bar down. I said, could he do that again? And everybody's rolling their eyes. But Niku was very obliging. They reloaded them. So there was this second chance.
That's he got a second chance back in the day.
Yeah, she got it.
Do the world record attempt again. It's like, okay, that's a tangent I want to explore for a second if we can, and that is, Randall, you were speaking a little bit off camera just about some of the things that we wouldn't know about, for instance, World's Strongest Man, but being a photographer. What are some of the things that people might not realize from photographing some of these events? We said World's Strongest Man, it actually is made primarily for TV consumption. So if the lighting's not right, if this is not right, they'll redo events. From attending, how many professional sports events have you probably attended first off in your career?
Oh, I couldn't tell you all of them, but I can rattle off some of the numbers. 5 Olympics, I know, as a weightlifting photographer. 5 Asian Games. Asian Games, if you're not familiar with them, I only learned about them when I was sort of on my way to the first one. I mean, that's the second largest multi-sport event in the world. And some people in Asia will tell you that in Asia it's even more prestigious than the Olympics for them.
It's bigger than the World Games, isn't
yeah.
it? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I think so. And prestige-wise, I mean, within the that athletic community, around 24 World Weightlifting Championships, about 24 European Weightlifting Championships, a lot more major international weightlifting contests, pile World's Strongest Man contests, a really large pile of Highland Games World Championships, and we did arm wrestling World Championships in our earlier years because Petaluma was one of the classic events that kind of drew me to the strength world. I'd read about it when I lived in the Midwest as a young teenager. And then when I moved to the San Francisco Bay Area, I had a chance to go to Petaluma. I go, wow, this is the World Wrist Wrestling Championship, which had all sorts of characters. And back in those days, that's where someone like me, someone who grew up in upper middle class, normal suburbs, that's where you go if you want to see someone with a tattoo.
Right.
That's what we're talking about. That's how much things have changed too.
No, Randall, that's such a cool aside that back in the day, basically, would you say it's a safe assumption that prior to basically even 1980, I'd say if you had a tattoo, you were probably a badass. Like you probably there's a tattoo for a reason. You know your stuff. You wouldn't. There actually is someone that local grocery store. He must be, I think now, probably in his 80s, where suspenders has old tattoos. Don't know from what era. Slicks his hair back.
Right.
The man is in his 80s.
Yeah.
I wouldn't touch him. Just the way that he conducts himself, and just his sleeves are still rolled up. I'm like, hey man.
Yeah. Petaluma was a great place. It was the World Wrist Wrestling Championships. It was started by a local newspaper guy, but it got a lot of attention. It was on Wide World of Sports. You know, I think like Frank Gifford would go out there, and people like that, Lynn Swan. You know, they had top people. And one of the first times I went, I'm sitting in the audience, and I'm sitting next to an old guy, local guy, and he says, I don't really like it so much anymore. You know, he says, look at him. He looks like he's a effing tennis player. I won't say the word, right? Doesn't look like an arm wrestler. He says, back in the old days, it's really good, arm wrestle till 12, and then the fights would start.
The real competition.
Yeah, the real yeah.
We didn't know UFC actually came out of it.
Boom, tick it down. It's interesting how parts of the culture can emerge from time to time, where you just highlighted a few different aspects. Where recently, I would say, Randall, in the last 10 years, raw powerlifting has emerged versus multiply powerlifting, right? And then another thing that has happened is arm wrestling, thanks actually to a few YouTube channels, I would say, they've now amassed hundreds of thousands of subscribers. Yeah, guys like Devin Lorette, and Saplinkov that now have hundreds of thousands of views, where even 8 years ago they didn't. So the necessity of content creators and people to chronicle these events, and even that's why you said something about World's Strongest Man. Like you go there, you try and take photos. You need a pass. You can't release this. Like you can't write up. There's secrecy. It's made for TV. Right. Do you think one of the reasons why some of the mystique has been let up might be due to some of the athletes honestly having social media profiles and their YouTube? Like I'm thinking right now, Brian Shaw, Martin Alicis,
has a big Instagram.
Half Thor. All these competitors have YouTube channels too, and they're all filming their own content. Right. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it's of necessity because everyone became a publisher. I mean, back in the early days of IronMind, for example, part of our popularity was the fact that we were a publisher.
Yep.
Okay, so people could get publicity. Think about, the guy with the camera around his neck, Milo Magazine. And the IronMind news column was like the go-to place in the strength world for news. And then when the ability for everybody to become their own publisher, that changed all that. And you're not going to put that back in a bottle. And so I'm not sure where World Strongman is now. I didn't go this year, but they had to recognize that, A, they couldn't stop this. And, as you were mentioning, this could be to their advantage. It's additional publicity. Yeah. Okay. And now, now it is really, everything's sort of like about numbers. People always say, well, you've got these many followers and these many followers and these many followers. And, I always want to tell people when they go, oh, well, I hardly have any followers. I hardly sold any of this or any of that. I say, look at Moby Dick. You know how many copies were sold in Melville's lifetime? Not even 3,000.
Wow, really?
So there's quality and there's quantity, and don't ever confuse it. It's just like training. I mean, people like one of the things that we contributed in grip strength was before IronMind started selling grippers. All you could get with these little cheap, plastic handled things. People do like 5 million reps. Okay, they had to get tired, and we'd say to people, "No, look, think of this as strength training. Pretend it's a barbell, and you're going to do deadlifts or bench presses or squats or something." So if you're trying to bench press 500 pounds, would you be doing 1,000 push-ups a day? Of course not. So same thing for grip strength. You need low rep stuff. And anyway, so
Yeah, absolutely. You stepped into a niche that you very accurately saw and connected something that people knew was true, but there just wasn't the quality there to support it. So now you're giving them the grippers, the Captains of Crush.
Yeah, and that's a quality versus quantity analogy. So, and that's true. I mean, something. So, I mean, I always say to people, if you're training for strength, volume's no substitute for intensity.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what I mean by that. So, and that's why I use the Moby Dick example. I mean, if you're a Moby Dick fan, some people don't like Moby Dick. Some people haven't read Moby Dick, but
Melville's legendary.
Yeah.
Queequeg. I'm 100%.
Hey, I am impressed. All right.
Oh, Captain Ahab. No, that actually is in my top novels.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine a guy is going to find one whale, in the ocean, and he does.
Yeah, that's right. Oh no, it's a. That is one of the all-time greats.
Plot spoiler. Sorry.
Yeah. Spoiler alert. We'll remove that in post.
Yeah, we got that out. But I was going to say that's an interesting conversation of quality over quantity, where not only were you an observer of the sports that you loved, a chronicler, but then a participant in providing certain services or certain tools of utility for aspiring lifters, which I think is essentially, if you are an iron enthusiast and you're an entrepreneur, it's basically the route that you want to go. It's kind of what we try and do. Can you talk to me, Randall, now to rewind a little bit, your own personal journey of how you got to that point? Because we mentioned a bunch of different things, psychology, working at a bank, being very influential there, also being a photographer. Let's talk about the origin now of you getting into lifting and how it kind of inspired you. Can you break that down a bit?
Absolutely. So just sort of on, not really a lark, but I wrote 5 installments of a proposed sports psychology column for IronMind magazine. And I sent them, this is one of the days of real mail. And I sent them to IronMind magazine. Then I get the next issue of IronMind magazine, and I felt awful. I open it because I see Frank Zane.
Yeah.
You guys know who Frank Zane is.
Yeah.
Had a column called The Bodybuilding Psychologist. Death knell. Okay.
Yeah.
But then you guys won't remember answering machines. Okay. Answering machines. Come back a couple days later. There's a message on the answering machine from John Balick. Love it. We'll start to run it. So that was the origin of the IronMind column. Okay. And then I was very taken by 20 rep squats, and I said to my wife, well, I think I'm going to write an article on this. And so I wrote it.
Widowmakers, you spoke to your wife about it.
So I wrote an article, sent it to Esquire. Again, this is in the days of what people call snail mail. Now, I never knew mail could go back and forth that quickly from the West Coast to the East Coast. I'm saying that it was rejected on the spot. I said to my wife, not to worry. I'm going to write. I'll turn it into a little booklet. Yeah. Well, that became Super Squats, which was a bestseller in the field for years. Don't be impressed when I say bestseller. I mean, it's like rounding error in a bookstore. But but in the category, it was
dominating.
Dominating.
Niche
and then,
specific. Yeah.
Right. And then, so that was our first product. And then grippers started very quickly after that, and Super Squats hip belt. And then one thing led to another. Doors kept opening. And in those days, the joke was, you went to the East Coast to be successful. You went to the West Coast to have fun, and East Coast you were a failure if you didn't work, for example, for Goldman Sachs, I'd say like a hedge fund. On the West Coast, you consider yourself a failure if you hadn't started a business. Now then, that wasn't thinking big tech. It meant some small, crafty, artisanal sort of thing. And that sort of gave birth to IronMind, is that sort of mentality. And I always liked specialty shops. I still have the original Patagonia catalog, and this is when Patagonia was like really hardcore, just climbing. It wasn't like fashion clothing and all this stuff. And I always loved high-end specialty shops in Greenwich Village when I was a child. So that was all part of the mix, to do something artisanal rather than industrial. And one thing led to another. I would say this to employees, and their eyes would kind of, get glassy. But I'd say, look, we really run IronMind as a profession as opposed to business. We have to make enough money, to stay in business, and we want to do that. But primarily, we want to take pride in the quality of our product and our service.
So artistry.
That's what's paramount, And so innovative designs, and one of the things that we did is I think we brought a lot of non-traditional materials into the field, a lot of non-traditional designs. One of the biggest compliments we get somewhat regularly is people will say, well, if Apple made things for the strength. Well, they look like IronMind products. So
Yes.
we go, oh, wow, thank you very much. I'm not sure John Av would agree with that, but we'll take it.
Yeah. But I think if you say that, people know what that means. That's very clear. And it doesn't surprise me, given the origins and kind of the mission statement behind IronMind is the word mind is in it,
Right.
Which, if we go back to the roots of physical culture, it was always seen as the holistic development of the body, the Grecian ideal, which not only just included proportions. People go, oh, Grecian ideal, like Steve Reeves. Well, no, Grecian ideal, like the idea that the form follows function and that your body and mind develop together. So you had kind of a piece of physical culture that goes back over 100 years embedded in the name of your company, and also that you have the element of art, which is a huge part of the origins of strength sport, where these vaudeville acts of people displaying strength and then Eugene Sandow displaying his body. So you had artistry, you had the mind-body connection, and you were an iconic photographer, so you're able to give a visual medium and an actual tangible artisanal medium and utility all at the same time. So it really, to me, doesn't surprise that we had all those components that was able to do a lot of what we're trying to do, unite lifters across different spectrums, because weightlifters, powerlifters, Highland Games competitors, strongmen, they all, I think, put you in the same category and what your work is as being valuable and saying, hey, that represents me.
Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, you're giving us a little bit too much credit. I will say, too, on this aesthetic thing, like, look at our products in the early days was very much and very proudly sort of, I would say, blacksmith. And then we started to evolve, and then we say, like, oh, look, not just another pretty face. This thing might look good, but it is incredibly strong.
Yeah.
No one on the face of the earth has strength at the level of this thing. But the mind thing, partly the psychology, well, not partly, the psychology background, and it was social psychology, and the primary idea that I had for the IronMind column in IronMind magazine was that, there's sort of a joke, a physician, someone come in, whatever the complaint, take 2 aspirins and go to bed.
Yep.
Well, it worked really well, so you could get away with that. So the psychologist's counterpart was relax and visualize success. And I said, there's a lot more that's known in psychology, social psychology, that we can bring to the table here. And that was the idea. The other thing, too, is, how often you see someone miss a lift and someone goes, oh, it's only mental.
Yeah.
And my joke is, only mental? Only mental? Excuse me. And then I would say, if someone says, well, what do you mean power of the mind? And, if I want to go to the extreme, I'll say, look, voodoo, okay, people will themselves to die, but you don't have to get that extreme. Go spend a night alone in a swamp in Louisiana. Go spend a night alone deep in the northern woods. Go spend a night alone way up on the side of the mountain. Then you come back the next morning and you tell me, only mental.
Yeah.
This is why kids are afraid of the dark, because they're usually in the dark alone, unlike adults. So anyway, the mind's a very, very powerful thing.
Yeah.
And there was a saying in bicycle racing years ago, Papa Royce Detna, he said, second is no better than fifth, and often the difference between second and first is so small, it could be a performance-enhancing substance, someone had a little better doctor or something like that, but it's the person who didn't crack, the person who,
Yeah, so from the perspective of someone who is, either deadlifting 990 or 1,000, it is all mental, because all they're focusing on is those 10 pounds.
Yep.
And I think that is something, Omar, that you've used the term. I know it's not your term, but the shut up and lifters.
Right.
Where they're like, hey, this isn't complicated. Just lift hard and go in there and get it done. And that's part of the ethos of the culture. But at the same time, in the competitive strength athlete world, you're looking for every edge, just like any other sport, because those edges make the difference between levels of performance that the average person who's making that YouTube comment will never get to, nor can they fathom.
Yeah, nor can they understand. And maybe that's a great segue into utilizing some of your education with also some of your experience in psychology. You had the opportunity, perhaps more than anyone, if we're to think about it, being a photographer and chronicling some of these journeys, attending so many sports events, elite sports events. Can you talk a little bit about the mental makeup of some of the elite lifters that you observed, and maybe some of the trends or observations, because you witnessed across different sports, across different times, decades, a ton of athletes lift, and you've seen success, you've seen failure. Can you just comment on that? Give a little commentary.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. I would have at least two athletes come to mind immediately, both weightlifters. Piros Dimas, extremely popular now. Okay, I first saw Piros in 93 in the training hall at the World Championships, and that was still at the point where everyone goes, who's this guy? Where'd he come from? Threw a tie on the lifts and decided on body weight the year before in Barcelona. And anyway, Piros, not quite then, but shortly thereafter, he had, I would say, he could generate a force field around him. You could feel it. Piros was magical. And Piros, it was sort of like Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson had won the fight before it started. People were so afraid of him before they stepped in the ring. Piros could just intimidate people, not out of meanness, but positive. Piros says to me once, we're talking about Mark Kuster, his great rival. And Piros, says, well, I really like Mark, but I feel sorry for him. I say, why, Piros? He says, because he's never going to beat me. and he could say that, sort of like, the late Jesse Marundi, who he still really miss. And Jesse said to me once, and Jesse was the only person who could say this, and you wouldn't get annoyed with him. He says, frankly, I'm the total package. So Piros could make a comment like that. Piros had that force field. He almost bombed out 2000 Olympics, and when he made the third snatch, and I think I have a photo of it. I mean, you can see his eyes welling up. It even got to Piros. I mean, he was looking in the jaws of hell, like that's what we call a crevasse, a glacier, on a major mountain. It's looked down and hadn't gone in. So he did have that tremendous mind. Another thing is Chronicling. People sometimes will say, well, what's the greatest lift you've ever seen? I go, well, didn't make the lift. It was the attempt. It was Chronicling, attempting the 270-2.5 clean and jerk. And it was the moment when you realized he was actually really going for this instead of, sorry, powerlifters, the powerlifter guy was just getting slapped in the face, beating the head against the bar, and then doesn't even really make an attempt.
Yeah, we all know
no, I'm sorry. Another day.
Yeah.
Chronicling, looks like Humpty Dumpty, roly-poly guy bounding up the steps, and you're sure he's going to chicken out at the line. No. I mean, I don't know why you're saying sure, but when you realized he was really going for it, and he almost got that elbow around. And so then I'm talking to him later. There was 272.5 kilos, most weight ever put on a bar in a weightlifting contest. I said, well, did you clean and jerk that heavily in training? He says, no. I say, how much? 240, something like that.
Yeah, God.
I said, but you were doing pulls, right? Yeah, I was doing pulls. I said, how much? About 240. I go, just a second. I said, how could you go from 240 to 272.5 and you went for, I says, thinks about it. He goes, Russian mind is very mysterious.
Yeah.
So he just pulls the Russian mind card.
Yeah.
Those are two that come to mind.
Yeah. That's it reminds me of two quick asides. One is to give another literary reference is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which the film with Jack Nicholson. Mm-hmm. That scene isn't as profound. In the book, it is with Randall Patrick Murphy, where he tries to lift up the water basin,
right?
The fountain, and it's impossible. They describe it as this gigantic thing that no human could possibly try and attempt to lift it. But in sheer defiance of the mental institution that all the patients are being housed in, it's in defiance of everything that it stands for. And so just for a second, as the chief describes it, as he's straining to lift it, this impossible thing that no human can lift, is that for a moment everyone in the room believes, and they almost see that it's inching like it's about to lift off just from the power of his conviction into it.
Yeah.
Which is also like in the one of the Avengers where they're all joking and Thor's hammer is sitting on the table.
Right.
And the idea is that you have to have the virtue of a god to move it. Captain America pulls on it and it just budges a little bit. And Thor goes, oh.
Yeah, it's surprised for a second and then it doesn't. Yeah.
Now then they screw it up and actually let him use it and stuff later. But
at that time,
it was that was probably from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yeah. Speaking of IronMind or the concept of an IronMind, you would know Randall better than I. I'm gonna bastardize his name. Russian super heavyweight lifter, one of the greatest of all time, Vasily
Alexeyev.
Alexeyev. Yeah, where he had if you ever met in Toronto, the owner of Fortis Fitness, Sean, he's an old school lifter. He loves all those quotes where he has a quote, Vasily, about competing, and then he references Shakespeare in his quote, where people these days, you have like a powerlifter's joke, and I do a powerlifter. It's like, oh, what motivates you? I just think about crushing my enemies. And this guy just what his worldly thought of what he says, where you said the Russian mind, where he says essentially, when it is time to compete, I don't think of a failure. It is a job. It is a thing that must be done. So before I enter the platform, I've already done it in my head, and it must be so. And that he said that people, essentially his competitors, which are true apparently in training, in the training hall, people would routinely outlift him, but when it came time to compete, that's when he would shine. But he said it is a necessity that I do it. Not that it's I believe I could do it. It is a thing that has basically been written down.
Big difference, I think, between people who do their best lifts in training and people who do their best lifts in competition. And a lot of people clearly fall in one group. We're in Sacramento. Tommy Kono, I don't even have to check off all his credentials. Tommy Kono was a guy who could go in. His first attempt might be well over what his best lift in training was. And other people, they just crack up when they get in a competitive situation. So to be a good competitive athlete, obviously you have to be in the group where you shine in competition. This job thing, though, is important because in then things were very different, and athletes in Eastern Bloc countries were paid. They were professionals, and people in the U.S., for example, were all amateurs. We were talking earlier about the guy breaks the world record and he's got to pay his own way out, gets no money, costs him money. Well, of course, that was standard back then. Norb Szymanski didn't work. His wife worked as a secretary. Where he'd work in between big contests and then get fired, and because he was going to go to a contest, But the first time I met top international lifters, 1990 Goodwill Games, Bulgarians are there, and Stefan Botev, Yoda Yotov, and their question was, how much are weightlifters paid in the U.S.? And we had a very hard time explaining to them that in the U.S. it was people who lifted weights, as amateurs. And they were like, you guys aren't telling us the truth. And there was a guy in weightlifting circles in San Francisco area in the late 70s, early 80s, Albert Meisen, late Albert Meisen, and he was Russian, and he said, when he went, the problem in the U.S. is that, he was lamenting our woes as weightlifters. He said, here people are weightlifters because they like lifting weights. In Russia, you're a weightlifter if you're good.
Yeah, that's right.
That's funny.
And so I don't know, there are these differences, like where it is a job, but then also you have to be good. It's like, okay, if you're good, if you're really, really good, you get into Harvard Law School. I don't want to offend anybody, okay? And if you're, all these different levels, it's like that in sports. And I always say, look, sports is the most competitive of all human endeavors. You look at the amount of whatever that separates the winner from the person in 10th place. In most human endeavors, that percentage difference would mock nix. It make no difference whatsoever. But in sports, it's the difference not just between first and second, it's first and 10th. And who knows who is 10th?
Yeah.
So you have to be really, really good. I had a conversation once with Ivan Abajev, the fabled Bulgarian weightlifting coach, and I said, you guys, you don't do assistance exercises. We have this idea that you do, because their idea of assistance exercises would be if they did a power clean, which they would almost never do, and wouldn't do pulls, for clean jerks, nothing, just do the lifts. I said, our idea is that, you do these assistance movements to kind of help you with the classical lifts. I said, what do you do? And he looks at me as if I'm really stupid. He says, well, I get a different lifter.
Nice.
So they got the depth. They had the depth, but you have to perform.
Yeah.
And so it's like you're in a high level professional firm that's competitive. You have to sell or whatever. If you're going to be out. And sports are like that there. And there, of course, in sports everything's quantitative, as in say in the financial world. So it's easy to measure your results.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean the first time. So I'm pretty unique in that if you look at me academically, I basically have a PhD in powerlifting programming and then a master's in bodybuilding nutrition.
Right.
But that's really cool. Everyone will all think it's really neat. But that was the way it's been done for decades in the Russian sports science programs.
Yeah.
You get as an athlete, you're called a master of sports, and you can also get a master's and a PhD specifically in the science for a specific sport, not just a sports science program like you might get at like ETSU or something like that. So it's I think the cultures that emerge out of those two different mindsets are quite different.
Yeah.
And it's why there's always been a mystique, I think, to some of the Russian systems. Also, the language barrier helps.
Yeah.
Not being really able to understand it.
And
so
the distance, you know,
Yeah.
you don't never believe anyone lives close to you, and they're way over there, so
Yep.
they
Yeah.
got to be right.
Yeah, we can ascribe some mystique to it. So
Yeah.
it's got to be amazing. And then, of course, the big problem is that we're applying a style of training that doesn't even relate to the social cultural connection that
That's huge.
American lifters have.
It's huge. I think that's really, and so many people miss that point for so long. You know, American weightlifting coaches say, "Oh, well, we have to do a Bulgarian system or, you know, a Russian system." I'd say, look, you know, it's crazy for exactly the reason that you mentioned. You're dealing with a completely different social fabric. It makes no sense.
Yeah.
I said the model should be, for example, Germany.
Yeah.
Look at Germany. Germany still produced some top, you know, recently, say up to Steiner, through Steiner, top weightlifting performances. But Germany as a country is very similar to the U.S. in terms of kids have lots of options. It's not like be a weightlifter, nothing. When I was young, I played hockey in Minnesota, and we were good, but, you know, we'd get just, you know, walloped by the teams from northern Minnesota. And they would get spanked by the teams from Canada. And the Canadians not just had ice more time of the year, but a lot of those, it was like a ghetto kid. It was make it to the NHL or you'd be working in the local cement factory for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And there was that motivation. We don't have that in the U.S. You're competing. And look at this. Look at the sports stars Germany produces. So then you say, well, what can we learn from the Germans? That would apply.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tapping into that individualism.
Yeah. Like why is it? What, you know, allow them to do this? Don't, you know, forget about what they're doing in China, Bulgaria, you know, where they got a captive audience. They can select people who are talented. Here you're fighting. You know, you're competing against the NFL. You're competing against kid could go to MIT. You know, it could do whatever. It could do podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
The sky's the limit.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, as someone who has written a sports psychology column, who's looked at these social cultural differences, who has a PhD in social psychology, that would then imply that sports psychology for the American lifter or a Chinese or a Russian lifter would take a very different form, right? The way you would motivate someone who has voluntarily chosen to spend their time outside of the necessity of their career to lift, like the three of us, or maybe made their career into like related to lifting, shows more of their internal intrinsic drive compared to, say, a Chinese weightlifter or a Russian weightlifter who showed athletic potential and was selected and now feels a duty, maybe a noble obligation, like they appreciate it, but it's not just for themselves. They're representing their country, their family.
Yeah, interesting question. I think that in the case of the lifters, say, from a country that like China, say, or Russia, where they're supported, the motivation is material. You know, blend in there, you know, like the pride of, say, Olympic gold medal or something. And here it'd be intrinsic. And okay, 1993 World Weightlifting Championships. You know, Chinese women, you know, are starting to really establish their dominance in the sport, and they're interviewing one of the lifters, and people are asking her, well, how did she get recruited? And she said, well, they offered me this, and I said no, and they offered me that, and I said, nah, I'm not really interested, and offered this other thing. She said, nah, I don't think I want to be a weightlifter. And they said, you will eat meat twice a week. And she said, where do I sign up? We don't realize the level of economic deprivation some of these people deal with. And, you know, back to this example of, say, like a Bulgarian, you know, wouldn't have all the young Bulgarian guy back then, wouldn't have had all the options, you know, that, say, a young American or young German might have. And talking about the, you know, the kid in Canada who can go to the NHL and be a star, kid here, you know, could be an NBA or NFL star. And otherwise, life might be very different. You know, it's a couple of choices. And so I think in some ways that, you know, we have the motivation licked. People want to, but, you know, that's why we have a lot of overachievers in weightlifting here. But, you know, but they're not at the same level. And there, people don't really maybe, you know, give a hoot, you know, about the sport as such, but it's their livelihood.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why I said, you know, we got these like uncomprehending looks from the Bulgarians. Like, what do you mean you don't get paid to be a weightlifter? You know?
And that totally changes how one would train, how one connects to the iron, their purpose, their reason. And I think that's why we have very different cultures in the Eastern European versus kind of American lifting, and why we're always just so intrigued and puzzled. And some of these stories that I have, like I remember when I got my USAW certification at California Strength, and they were talking about when they brought over the Bulgarian weightlifting coach and just how it was just not a good fit. Like they just didn't get it, and he would tell stories about a joke they're not even sure is a joke. Like, yes, one time I told them I put AK-47 in the lifter. They're telling me, get lift or you get shot.
Right.
And all the lifters are like, did that really happen or not? I can't tell.
It might have.
You're like,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also interesting when we say national pride or how much you can achieve. Where I think of Hossein Rezazadeh, where he Iranian lifter, where when he won, he is a celebrity in Iran. You know what I mean? Or watching some of the weightlifting, where a lot of the Chinese lifters, when they go out, I'm not sure on the exact translation of what they say, but it's basically like for the glory or something. They'll yell something, and then the coach yells it back in affirmation,
Right.
as opposed to, that's kind of almost individualism versus collectivism,
Right.
where the idea, here in the West, it's like you're doing it for yourself. There's national pride, but there's not your nation on your shoulders as you're about to make this lift.
The best example of that's North Korea, and the lifters will say, I did this, for the great leader.
Right.
And willing to, if it was probably a choice between life or death and dying and trying to make I'm sure they would pick that.
Yeah.
It's,
Man, if you think historically, in Western physical culture, it goes back to the vaudeville era, which is essentially about performance, being a spectacle, and being an entrepreneur off on your own. Right. And it makes sense that the roots of how our lifters relate to the iron and how those lifters relate to it are going to be very different. And that's why I think it's really interesting how it often does tie into entrepreneurialism. It has this kind of capitalist element to it, and that has a communitarian. So I would love to hear about when did you decide to go, right, I'm going to make my passion, lifting weights, also my career, and what did that trajectory do to your perspective, and how has it changed over time?
I think that the IronMind column was obviously the thing, that it was a turning point for us. And I can't say enough good things about John Balick of Ironman magazine, very supportive. First accepting the column, and then I read Super Squats, which did very well, and John Balick was using it as a premium for subscriptions to Ironman, so that gave us guaranteed sales every month. And then we reintroduced the original Ironman magazine hand gripper, ferociously hard gripper, made by a man named Warren Tedding from Minnesota. I still have my original one from like 1966 or something like that. Very crude, but incredibly hard, and kind of an ultimate challenge device. Here, can you close this?
Right. It's above the level 4.
No. The one, there were sort of 3 strengths or 4 strengths then, and the easiest was about like a 1.
Okay.
People now they like to put their grippers under electron microscope. I don't know why, but these, like, kind of the beauty was they were all sort of handmade, and each one was different. I just tell Warren, like, even on his benches, I said, Warren, you should sign these. Each one was made by you. This is not like industrial production. Say, Warren Tedding made this bench. Warren Tedding made this gripper. I said once, Warren, last batch of grippers were narrow. He says, well, who cares? Just close it. Doesn't matter. But by then, Warren Tedding was very influential because I think he was encouraging me to have a catalog. See, early, the original Ironman magazine under Perry Rader in Nebraska, they always sold equipment as well as the magazine. As well as having the magazine, Ironman magazine. They had lifting news for a while, and those 2 publications were kind of, in some ways, inspiration for Milo. Because we wanted to cover strength the way lifting news did, and we had this benighted idea that if we did a really good job, it would be popular, and of course it wasn't. It took the miracle of time to have that happen. Things had to shift culturally, and it would be a different medium. It wouldn't be print that would do that. But anyway, by then it was full on board. With strength stuff, and one thing led to another.
Yeah,
we were never in any danger of getting rich, but we made a living and stuff. So that wasn't our goal. So it's again professional versus business thing.
Artisanal,
So,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and you did this in conjunction with your actual career. This is like the passion that you're pursuing.
Yeah, no, this is post. So I went from corporate world and did corporate consulting for a while, and so that overlapped with starting. Really writing was really where it started. The column, and then the book, and then some products, and so there's some overlap. Still corporate consulting, retail bank marketing things, and then products, and then very quickly it just became IronMind full time. It was a little scary,
Yeah.
Did that feel good to shift to something that was?
Well, it was this idea that I mentioned that then there was an idea that you wanted to be a shirt sleeve entrepreneur, and this was, like, as I mentioned, this was like pre-big tech. It meant, like the guy's got the surf shop or whatever,
Right.
or he makes
Pre-Gary V. Yeah.
like the very best of whatever, and that's what people come from, all over the world to get this thing there. Sort of that, and then that allowed us to move from the San Francisco Bay Area, very, very nice place, lived in Marin, to Nevada City, which was a place that we could only go to on weekends before. And most of the people who come there from our town, they are Bay Area refugees. They come from L.A., and suddenly we got to live there. And to me, it was amazing because when I raced bicycles in graduate school, I went to Stanford, so I'd ride, Pescadero, La Honda, all these beautiful places, Half Moon Bay down to Santa Cruz or something. And I'd wonder how people could live in some of these gorgeous little towns. I mean, I lived in suburbs, in the Midwest, and everybody was like, he was a doctor or a lawyer, worked for a large corporation. How could you live in one of these gorgeous little towns? They knew something I didn't know. And then, thanks be to God, I ended up, becoming one of those people. I've been very fortunate because that's what I wanted. There's a line, be careful what you wish for because God punishes you by giving it to you.
Yeah.
So that's, what I wanted. I've had this incredible life, being able to live in Nevada City and have this niche company. And so it was full on board very quickly. And it's interesting you ask that question because I was at the World Arm Lifting Championships in St. Petersburg, Russia, a couple of months ago, and a guy who started, I won't mention his name or the product because he was having some trouble, he felt, and he said, tell me, how did you do this? I said, you just got to hang in there. It's patience and persistence. And I said, you're actually doing very well because he gave me some of his numbers. And I said, just, if you want to get rich, probably go do something else. But, be satisfied and just keep plugging away. And again, the idea that things you don't try, you will not succeed at 100%. So
that's great. On a micro level, because I obviously don't have as many decades in the entrepreneurial game of lifting as you do. But we started 3D Muscle Journey in 2009.
Okay.
And that was our goal was, we're all got our day job. We're all doing our thing. I was a personal trainer. Jeff had actually just gotten laid off from Numi, an auto plant that closed in the Central Valley. Brad, he owned a gym and also was an x-ray tech on the side out in Portola, working in Reno as well. And Berto was a trainer and then worked in after-school care in the local community. And the four of us were also natural bodybuilders who made zero money and lost money competing, despite professional status. And we just wanted to help and elevate the local community who was doing a lot of things that we thought were, neutral at best and harmful at most common. And now we're having our 10-year anniversary just in a few days. And
congratulations.
Thank you. And only about a month or two ago did the last one of us actually fully step away from our day job. So it took 10 years, and now we're completely working in our own field, which is scary because now, honestly, it shouldn't be, because I think we saw with like the economic collapse in 2008 and the housing bubble burst, and your employer is also a human.
Yeah.
Everything is...
The supposed safety net might not actually be there of the place you're being employed at.
You just actually don't see it.
Yeah.
So you can avoid the existential crisis of not knowing your company could collapse at any time.
Yeah.
But now you're in charge of it and you get to see the numbers on a day-to-day. And I think there's both fear and empowerment, which is good because it does expand. It expands you. It allows you to be afraid and not be in your comfort zone and make you, better and better able to give back. So it's cool to see. I think you're a testament to someone who's just kept pushing that envelope. And like you said, maybe that it is a bit of a punishment to get what you want. But you went from living in a suburb to a beautiful place. You went from working in banking, which probably didn't hook into you and provide you as much meaning as connecting with the lifting community, I'd imagine.
Things are different. I would never give up that experience. I mean,
Right.
then people would say, when I first started working at B of A, this was when B of A's world headquarters were in San Francisco, and older banker there said to me, he says, well, Bank of America is big because we round off everything to millions. And I was talking to a guy once who had a much bigger company than IronMind, and I'm sort of like a little apologetic with this. He goes, look, the only difference between his company and my company is a couple of zeros.
Yeah, you can tell there's an inherently different value system.
But I would never give up that B of A experience, because I knew it was like being that side of the desk, and you called someone, Randall Strossen, B of A, like like very Tim, and Randall Strossen from IronMind, clunk, it's
Right.
and you find out the value institution. Of course, this is why most people hang out in big groups. It's why most people work for somebody else. It's scary out there alone. I don't know how things might have changed now with e-commerce, but statistics on small businesses, I mean, the numbers are really scary. I mean, you look at it and you say, I can't do this. This is suicide.
Yeah.
But people start off and they have little dreams and hopes, and I hope everybody can succeed. Is lucky enough. And I would say that, look, you have to have some talent, you have to have focus, you have to work really hard, but you have to also recognize there's another factor. It's things that are out of your control.
Yeah.
Okay. And, people say, well, he's just lucky. And someone else will say, well, it's the harder he works, the luckier he gets. But things are not always predictable. Okay.
Yeah.
If they were, all the little micro-loading systems, all determined, everyone would be a world champion. Everyone would be a world record holder.
Yep.
Yeah.
Keep adding grams to the bar, you eventually be the strongest man in the world.
Exactly. If it were that simple, and it's not. So there are always things out of your control, and you have to recognize that. I mean, you got to take responsibility for, did you have talent? Were you focused? Were you working hard?
Yeah.
But then at the end, you have to graciously say, I gave him my best shot, but, he flattened me.
Yeah. And that's just competition in general, or trying to stick yourself out there.
Yeah.
I think it might be correct to say that in the lifting world, where someone tries to give you a spot and says it's all you, but it's not. They're spotting you and they're holding the bar. Trying to be an entrepreneur, it really is all you. And a way, when you said it's empowering, I feel the same thing. And I kind of identified a little bit with you, Randall, where you said you wrote the column and then things kind of evolved from there. It wasn't like, okay, I'm starting this in 1987. Here's my 10-year plan. Here's my 20-year plan. This is the first step to this step. I stumbled forward, I would say, in my career, where I try to do one thing, and then one thing exposed me to more opportunities, and then they kind of reframe things. What did I want to do next? And then slowly over time. And actually, me even getting involved in YouTube was essentially an accident, where when I uploaded videos, I was working at a gym as a personal training director, and so I had a large flow of clients that would just be going through, and you got to do evaluations for them. And I wanted a place to upload a video just to give basics of how to warm up, how to do cardio, just a few things. And the only place that I saw that you could post videos, they had to be public, was YouTube. And that's how that journey began. But it's opening yourself up to possibilities, and then trying to adjust to the market, where there's a few ideas that I tried to implement, and they didn't go so well. And then a few others that actually did all right, So hearing that too, and especially being, for you, what's unique too is being essentially a pioneer, where this isn't hockey. This isn't basketball. This isn't football. It's not a long-established tradition where it's like, oh, you want to be a sports journalist for football? Well, we have 50 years of doing this. It's a multi-billion-dollar sport.
It's like, walk it.
Do you want to chronicle strength sports? It's like of your own volition? Like, you don't come from the Eastern Bloc? You're like, yes. So very interesting.
My wife always says businesses reflect the personality of the founder or the owner. And I think that's really a wise comment. And you can see, for example, you're talking about 10-year plans. People who have they have an industrial vision. They want to do this in bigger is better and bigger numbers and mass production, all that. And that's a perfectly legitimate way to go. And some people, would really want to do that. And other people will be, well, I'm just want this and size that, this. And there are lots of different ways that you can run a business.
Artistic, pragmatic, industrial.
Whatever, strike some balance. And so I would say, just do what you like. I mean, my advice used to always be to my son was, look, do something that you like well enough that you would be willing to do for free, but where you can make a living. Because if you just do one of those, you're going to be unhappy. If you just do it for money, you're going to be unhappy. If you just do something you love, but you can't make any money, you're going to be unhappy. So strike some compromise. I think moderation, talking about classic ideas like moderation, all things, including moderation. No,
Moderation of moderation.
That's really well said, and I like that we're talking about capitalizing on opportunities within the constraints of reality, and understanding that you're not in control, but you are in control of your own efforts and how you react. One thing that has semi-recently happened is Milo is no longer being printed.
Right. 25 years, and that was that. We told our story.
You told a great story, and I guess at a certain point you have to realize, like, this is just not the way media is going. So I would love to hear about that decision, the emotion behind it, and or did new doors open? Or what can we see for the future?
No. I think we were done with that, and it's a hard thing to say. Like you need to know when to say when,
right?
Whatever it is, drinking, whatever. It's like you need to kind of have some discipline, and we sort of, I think, frankly, maybe a year or two before that, knew this is it. We're starting. We feel that we've done what we wanted to do, and going to stop. We said, "Let's do 25 years. We've got a quarter of a century," and I mean, we look back. And we said, "Look at these 100 issues," and we get a real kick. We look through them because there's so much meat in them. But as you said, people don't. They don't read the same amount of stuff. You guys, it's amazing. Who Dave Draper is. You mentioned John Grimmick. Do you know who Steve Stanko is?
Absolutely.
Yeah. See, okay, so you guys,
1940.
First guy to total 1,000. First guy to total 1,000 pounds.
And I think 1941, Mr. America. I might have the date wrong.
I think I'm going to go with you on that. But just on faith, you've impressed me. So
I actually think I'm wrong, but I appreciate that.
So I don't know if people read, and there's something like social media. It's kind of an interesting thing because, say, until this recent shift, a lot of the people in the iron game broadly a lot of them were like asocial, maybe antisocial. And now you've got this complete reversal. I mean, there are some really surly characters and people. I mean, they were, not only didn't shower, I mean, they didn't like to talk to people, and or maybe like a little wild or violent, and things are very different now. Of course, it's mainstream, but I've seen that in a lot of things. I mean, I was a rock climber, decades ago now. And that was, Camp 4 was like a unusual group of people, and the climbers were unusual. Another thing's gone mainstream. I think, in a way, I mean, due to through internet globalization, cultural homogenization, everything's sort of very level now. Everybody can do everything.
It's almost like people can form cultures now. Because like you said, when people were disconnected before the internet, their relationship to a sport or a hobby or an art was intensely more personal because they weren't influenced by others as easily. Now, if you do something that's actually quite unique, you can find an online community, and then an emergent property of that connection is a culture.
Right. Yeah.
So it makes sense why lifting culture has changed, because now we it's not just you, or even just you and the rest of the biker gang-ish guys.
That's interesting, because I mean that shows the complementarity of that shift. Because I was commenting more on something that was niche has gone mass market, and you're saying, well, but even if you're staying in that niche, you can find some connectivity, some other group of people. And I think Grip's probably a really good example of that. Like people who just want to talk about their grippers. They want to talk about their grippers.
Yeah.
And
it's a niche within a niche.
Yeah.
It really is.
You can find it on the internet, and they're there.
Oh yeah.
So
it has almost allowed even people to take on multiple identities and to go even further down the rabbit hole of how specialized they want to be in some ways.
Yep.
Where
no squad over.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. It's like people are sort of generalist in ways, and then others still will try and gravitate towards something specific. I like how in the modern era, you see certain things emerge that have been buried for a long time. When you, for instance, were chronicling strength sports, powerlifting was basically, it was like the bastard child in the strength sports. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I remember when powerlifting was trying to kind of get formed as a sport, and that was before they settled on the three lifts that you have now. And press behind neck or strict curl were often in the mix. And what I thought you were going to say was one unified body is, whereas, now, I'm the world champion.
Yeah.
World champion in powerlifting.
Yeah.
Started federations only in my garage, and I'm the only competitor, but I hold all the world records.
But I don't.
I'm kidding, of course, but I did see that, powerlifting wasn't even hadn't even been organized.
You're so far not off
60s.
Kidding. I actually emceed. I'm not going to name the organization.
Yeah.
I'm looking at Jim because he knows exactly what I'm talking about. I emceed the World Championships for a powerlifting meet that was held in Portola, California, and our closest thing to an international competitor was a guy from New Jersey.
Yep.
And one of my clients, who is now actually world champion in the IPF, was the world champion back then in 2011. And we had 60 lifters, and I was the MC. So it just goes to... And I didn't see you there. I thought you were going to be our international...
Yeah, why didn't you chronicle that? You're too busy at World's Strongest Man. What the hell's that about, Randall?
One of the biggest compliments I ever got, Herb Glossbrenner. Do you guys know who Herb Glossbrenner was? Herb Glossbrenner was a guy on the margins and powerlifting guy, wrote for Powerlifting USA, which was around for decades. But I showed up at a contest in West Virginia because Ed Cohn was going to lift, and Herb Glossbrenner goes, "Randall Strossen, this must really be big." I was like, "Herb, that's the biggest compliment I've ever gotten." But
now it's a legit sport.
Yeah, powerlifting. But see, powerlifting, I mean, in a way, that's sort of, fractionalizing like that, coming up, that splintering, they weaken themselves.
Yes.
And you could just keep doing that and through internet have more and more subdivisions, but that's your undoing. You have to have the discipline to stay under one roof. And Olympic sports have that advantage because you can only have one governing body.
And especially because it's an international competition. It's like the Greek city-states against Rome. Stood no chance.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, I was going to say that it's interesting how, how parts of a culture, kind of like I was saying before, emerge, where you talked about arm wrestling too, where only recently, and I was actually surprised that it happened, there's a few people making content in the last 3 years on social media. And so for the average person, like you go down the street, if you're someone that lifts at the gym, they're more familiar. They could probably now name 2 arm wrestlers. You know what I mean? If you were to ask me personally 5 years ago, and I'm not, representative or anything, I would have a hard time. I could probably name one,
I would say Sly Stallone over the top.
And over the top. He won. He trained for that.
That's real. That's a documentary.
And so it's very cool to see how media can influence individuals. And just to tie it all around, my buddy Alan, who has a gym that who he has all your posters hung up.
A man of good taste.
Yeah,
thank him for me.
Impeccable taste. Has your books. He routinely, when he started his channel, and this is only 5 years ago, he would do sets of 20 on the squat. Like, that's the thing that he do. It's like, I wonder where he got that from. Right? Yeah. Where you see that influence. And even his, when you said you kind of were contrasting the industrial versus artisanal kind of approach to things, and he definitely would be on the latter with how he, and so it's just interesting how influential someone could be, or how a piece of work can be. And to cite another Sacramento lifter, I don't know if you remember him, Alan told us the story that Ben Claridad of Occam Athletics, he was doing a grip, there's like a grip competition, and you took a look at his gym, and Ben said it actually was the best compliment he's basically ever heard about his gym, because he's like, he obviously knows who you are, he has it, like your posters up, and he said, you said this is what a gym should look like. When you walked into his weightlifting facility, and you kind of looked around, you're like, this is what a weightlifting facility should look like. And he's like, that's it, man.
I can now die.
I've been blessed. It's like, this guy has seen how many training halls, so.
Well, we're talking about the Bulgarians for a minute. There was a story that when they built the weightlifters a slick new gym, they refused to go in it.
Right.
But now gyms are, all gyms are
A little too sterile.
Yeah. I mean, the old sports palace, there are holes in the floor. the showers, I mean, they were disgusting. There's like slimy stuff. And then finally the health department in San Francisco shut it down. But I mean, that was an old school gym. Things have changed now. But I work out in my garage. I mean, I like to talk to myself when I lift weights. Well, in between sets. And so it's an individual thing. And for a lot of people, I mean, going to the gym is, it's a social thing. But things have changed. I mean, Milo had Pavel Tsatsoulin's original article on kettlebells, and that created the whole kettlebell thing. Like you can see kettlebells in Big Five. John Brookfield battling ropes all over the place now. I think maybe 1997, Europe's strongman contest introduced the tire flip. And I'd never seen this before. I said, Marcel Mostar, I said, what's in the tire to make it heavy? He says, just the rubber. It's 400 kilos, 880 pounds. Okay, enormous tire, and they're flipping it. Okay, and it was the year Gary Taylor got crushed by the tire. It looked like a giant had grabbed in one hand below the knee and one above and twisted. It was really pretty sick looking, sick in the bad way. But anyway, I've got a neighbor. She's a retired senior executive from a large corporation, and she does tire flipping as part of her workout with her personal trainer. I mean, that's where things have gone. Kettlebells all over the place, ropes all over the place. But, we've benefited by that too. Captain's Crush Grippers used to be a really niche thing, and they're worldwide. So IronMind, has kind of been on part of that. But it has been a huge change. And before CrossFit hit the level that they did, I think a lot of people wouldn't have believed that you would have that many people in the world doing, say, power cleans or cleans and jerks or something like that.
It's funny. There was the first time I got exposed to CrossFit, because it kind of popped up right around the time I became a trainer and started to get a little mainstream. And I went to a CrossFit gym, and I said, "Oh, this is like strongman with lighter weights." And the trainer was like, "What's strongman?"
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. It's funny how things get sterilized, kind of what you were saying, where it's like, you think of these big tires when they're first introduced in 97, 900 pounds, these people are flipping things. And then you see your retired next door neighbor, like flipping like the 100-pound tire where
inner tube.
Yeah. It's like, it's the same thing. It's like, well, not really.
So you must have seen so many things that go in cycles, because I, as now in this stage of my interest in the iron game, I've dabbled a lot in history. It's not my formal training, obviously. I'm a sports scientist and a nutritionist, but I find it very interesting how CrossFit is seen as this new emerging interesting thing, but it is actually the most similar to the original physical culture style of training, where they were doing hand balancing, tumbling, max lifting, and then repetition work, body weight work, and just general athletics. And the bodybuilders are now making fun of CrossFitters, and it's just kind of this. Once you start reading the history, it's just like you're making fun of people what they're doing in Muscle Beach.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. You have to throw that. Because Greg Glassman had a gymnastics background.
Yeah.
And in my earliest conversations with him, he would talk about gymnastics. And see, Greg, with that background, he had this very unconventional thought. He said, well, snatches aren't very hard. Because coming from a gymnastic background, now you talk to someone lifting weights, and like the snatches are like, let's burn incense to this. This is the most complex thing a human can do physically.
Yes, I can say. But starting as a 30-year-old powerlifter trying to do a snatch. They were on a pedestal that I never achieved. Yeah, go ahead.
But see, body type plays in that. But that's an interesting point. All the hand balancing stuff for Muscle Beach. I hadn't really thought about that, but you're absolutely right. And body weight exercises and stuff, not so much max lifts. And so
Chip Conrad has entered the room, folks. Oh my goodness.
Now
we'll take a brief second here. Awesome. I'm excited about this. It's going to be good times.
Now, let me ask you, Randall, from experiencing so much and just decades upon decades of observing things, where do you think the future of lifting, what do you think what it holds, from seeing trends or just seeing things emerge, like you said, from equipment, battle ropes, kettlebells, to different aspects of the sport becoming popular?
230 kilo snatch? No. That's something I hadn't really thought of. I don't know if the pendulum will swing back. I mean, in the past, there's been like a surge of gyms, and then they've kind of disappeared. I used to think, I moved to California in 1974, and I used to think, these housing prices are ridiculous. This bubble's got to burst.
And it hasn't burst yet.
Now, and I would see those $65,000 houses in Palo Alto. That how could someone pay that much for that? Those houses are $1 million houses now. So it might be the same thing here. People say, well, maybe CrossFit's maxed out. Your neighbor flipping the tire. She'll go back to knitting soon.
Yeah.
I don't know. It might be a cultural change. In Turkey, it was almost like people didn't breathe. They inhaled air through a cigarette.
Yep.
Everybody smoked. Everybody. I mean, everybody. And then, I don't remember what year it was when the new airport was built in Istanbul, and I landed, and I see a no smoking sign. I thought, did I get on the wrong plane?
I am not in Turkey. Yeah.
And they completely changed it. They had what people informally called the smoking police. They would inform neighbors who were smoking in illegal places. Completely wiped out smoking. Okay, turned on a dime. Okay, and so the power of social trends, the power of wanting to be in the group. It's not really so much, I don't think, law enforcement fear of jail. It's wanting to belong, not being ostracized. Okay, you've seen that create this large body, as it were, of people lifting weights. That could change.
Yeah.
Someone could say, well, it's not really cool. Let's go back to being couch potatoes. And, and then you get 10 couch potatoes, and then all of a sudden, lethargy becomes the thing people want.
Yeah. Right.
But I don't know. I think people have realized, going back to these classic ideas, there are real benefits to having this sort of lifestyle.
Yep.
And it's because of that, it's going to be intrinsically rewarding. And there were always people who lifted weights, say when I was young, and those are people who always would lift weights. The same thing would happen now, even if some parts of the large groups drifted off. I think people have realized the benefit of stretching, lifting weights, running, all these things. So
those fundamental truths.
Yeah, but as far as future, I don't know. You guys tell me. You're from this generation. I'm still sort of like in the 20th century, I think.
Well, I actually will agree with you. I think one really cool thing that we've had at Iron Culture is we've had people from different tribes, if you will, come onto our podcast that we're not really associated with. I've been enmeshed in the raw powerlifting community, the natural bodybuilding community, and therefore on the fringes of the broader powerlifting and broader bodybuilding community. And as a trainer, kind of the fitness community, and we have some overlap there. But having had the first CrossFit World Games champion on, and him talking about how a return to bodybuilding as a foundation, and that people need to not specialize for CrossFit, which is this ridiculous inversion of their core beliefs, and that you need to have this foundational level of strength before then you get out. Seeing the other gentleman we had on talking about functional bodybuilding, and even just looking at the ideals that we have at 3D Muscle Journey, dedication, desire, discipline, and the word journey being in it, and that we had this process-oriented goal. Before I even started studying the history of bodybuilding, I realized that we were a throwback unintentionally to some of those things. So and now, for example, the emergence of the classic bodybuilding division, or Sean Roden winning the Mr. Olympia, or the rising popularity of raw powerlifting, where it has a lower barrier to entry, where you don't need these triple ply shirts, and I gotta get my katana just perfectly, etc. And the popularity of all these different things that are a little closer to the roots. I think as things become overly complex and super niched out, people do look to have some kind of return to some of the key elements. So I'm optimistic, and that some of those key elements of physical culture are not going to go anywhere, but they will probably get emphasized in cycles.
Yeah, I think there's value in understanding things at sort of face value.
Yeah.
There could maybe have been a time when you could say, well, I squatted this, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And people would kind of know what it meant. Now, if they're really old timers, they go, well, I never did any of those squats. I did deep knee bends. But the real point is, now if someone says I squatted this, you have to ask so many questions to interpret what was this feat of strength this person did. Was it no? Was it monolift? What kind of suit? Spotters pulling up? Were the plates legit?
Raw with sleeves, raw with wraps.
You go on, and it's not like just, how much you squat. Jim Schmitz, who had owned the Sports Palace, Olympic weightlifting team coach, and top guy in weightlifting. Scott, he makes me look like a total nothing as far as how many world weightlifting championships. I've gone to like a couple dozen. Jim's gone to like maybe almost double that. At least 50% more probably. But I've lost my train of thought with this. This I think we'll cut out.
Good note here. Yeah, we could do that.
It'll come back.
Cool.
No.
Yeah, Jim, and I probably shouldn't tangent off Jim Schmitz, or we wouldn't be able to cut it out. It wouldn't make any sense. But
come full circle. Yeah, I think so. So we've commented a bit on our thoughts of where the future might go, which involves the past. I'm curious, probably on something you probably have more confidence in. Is what's the future of IronMind?
Well, interesting question, because initial idea with IronMind was that when we were done, we were going to stop working, we would just kind of shutter it. That was kind of the idea. We've had an offer from a Russian guy wanted to buy it. I said, well, I'm not really sure. It's still sort of personal.
Yeah.
I had conversations with Tom Linzer from Ivanko about this years ago. He says, I'm just going to close Ivanko. It's too personal. When I'm done, well, his son's now running Ivanko.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm not sure. One of the things that we want to do, though, definitely is consolidate some of the media assets that we've got. We've made feeble attempts at taking all the original IronMind training hall and competition videos and just putting them on YouTube. And so far, that's been a little bit beyond us because we're so 20th century. But we've made some faltering steps in that direction. We put all that material up on YouTube for people, and they can just access it. And I'm quite confident I've got the world's largest archives of strength sports photography for the last quarter century plus, and I'd like to take more of that available to people too. We've got the posters and stuff, but I'd like to get more galleries up there. I mean, I took a little stab at that for a while on Instagram. We'll put a picture up, tell the story. People enjoyed it, but it's a lot of work to do that. I got other things to do, but so those are some of the things that we want to do. Sort of make sure those things are available to people in the future. And not sure, whether we'll just, at some point say, that's it, close up or sell it or maybe sell some of the brands or something like that.
Well,
we're open to possibilities.
If I can just tell you some of the things you were like, well, we might do this, might do that. I got almost visibly excited when you started to say some of those things. So I think there would be definitely an interest in like the archives and the level of depth of information or visual. Man.
Oh, yeah.
Dude, I would lose many hours of my life happily to some of that. So I think that's really, really cool.
We got a big compliment from a young guy. It was, I think, maybe an Aranda squat from a video, and we reposted it. It had been pirated. A lot of this stuff was pirated from the days when we were selling the stuff. And anyway, we put it up on Instagram, and a guy puts up a comment that's saying, like, this is the lift I was telling you about. It broke YouTube. Mm-hmm. I thought, wow, that's really good. I think that's a good thing. We did that.
A good thing.
No, Randall, I know exactly the one. It's where he's wearing the red pants.
Okay.
It's called the video, The Best Squat in the World.
Okay.
And so it's that video, but like a crappy version of it, low quality, of him squatting.
Yeah.
And it has, I think, like 2 million views.
Really? Yeah.
So I think actually someone that could assist with some of those aspects of transferring them to you and giving some context, because that which is old is made new again, where people do like retro things and people do like to chronicle. They want to know where things are from, the origins, when they get involved in anything. Like Eric is really into hip hop. He knows a very good amount about it. And so kind of paying not only respect to the past, but getting closer to the truth of what something's about. I think people will be interested in, because basically there is a chasm where, you chronicled a bunch of strength sports, and then there's a social media age, you know what I mean, that has recently taken off. But a lot of people from the social media age aren't aware of all these feats. And I remember actually the squat video you're talking in particular, people are actually still continuously surprised where they'll cite certain feats of strength from the last 30 years that people just don't even know about, because it's not on the internet. And people basically think, like Larry Wheels is the strongest lifter of all time. It's like, well, there's a lot of really strong lifters.
Hold
It's
your
like,
horses.
yeah, it's like maybe one of the strongest, certainly in the last 10 years. It's like, but there's been a lot of really impressive lifters. So
Yeah, I think it's so important because those misperceptions of what can and has been achieved can be self-limiting, which goes back to your psychology understanding. And one thing that I've done as a way of perhaps removing some of those self-imposed breaks in the natural bodybuilding community is I've just been posting a lot of pictures of lifters before the emergence of anabolic steroids, because you'll hear things like, oh, you can't get vascularity, or you can't get X big, or you can't get this, or you can't get striated glutes without XYZ anabolic. And there's really nothing to say when I put up a picture from a guy in 1898 who looks like that, except
Underground Photoshop.
yeah, exactly. This is the real the real photo. You like they had to draw it on there.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so I have seen the personal value as an athlete, and also the value as a science communicator, and a hopefully someone who gives value and meaning to lifters in connecting with history. So I just want to say that I'm incredibly grateful for what you've done, and it sounds like what IronMind's going to be continue doing.
Thank you.
To get things out, and you making the trip means the world to us.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I mean, this has really been my pleasure, and appreciate your interest in the work you did, learning about IronMind and the 2 grippers you got. And
Hey.
how'd you do with the number 1?
I did close the number 1
Good for you.
with my right hand.
Yeah.
once.
No, not multiple times. Multiple times, yeah. Let's just say I'm a better bodybuilder than a strength athlete. We'll leave it at that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is there anything, Randall, you feel we haven't covered that you would like to talk about, either about your journey, IronMind, anything?
Now you've been really generous listening to me.
Oh no, you've been very generous with your time. I will out humble that immediately for you coming.
You can't
down
out humble
here.
it.
Yeah, no, I am the best at being humble.
It's a losing battle. Yeah, I got that, buddy. Let me ask you this then. For those that are interested in taking a look, you said the YouTube channel and so forth, where can people find you now?
Oh, IronMind.com.
Yeah. Would be like the number one place.
IronMind.com.
One-stop shop.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Links to the YouTube channel, all that stuff is there.
Yeah, sort of vaguely on there. Might have to work a little bit. You know, you store that's sort of part of our cultural history too. We used to not publish our phone number. We didn't want to make it too easy for people to find us.
Yeah.
Well,
So my wife gets annoyed when I tell this story, but Sonny Barger used to say, "The Hells Angels never had to advertise. The right people always found us."
I like that.
And that was sort of like we wouldn't want to be like too visible. It's sort of the opposite. You know, the ethos now. It's like, hey, look at me, I'm a star. Blah, blah. We're like work a
That's
little
cool.
bit. The right people will show up that way. But yeah, IronMind.com will take you there, and the e-store's there, and IronMind News column for history and stuff too. So
Fantastic. Well, I'm glad that the right people found you. You responded to my email incredibly graciously, quickly.
Well,
and here we are. So we are the right people.
there you go.
I feel good. Awesome.
Randall, thank you so much for being on. Thank you to everyone for listening to this episode of Iron Culture. We'll link everything in the description. If you enjoyed this episode, you can help us out by leaving a rating and review on iTunes as well. If you're on our YouTube channel, go ahead and leave a comment. We'll do our best to respond to them, and we'll catch everyone in that next episode every single Monday.